The wind howled through the darkened alleyways like a living thing, slicing through layers of clothing and gnawing at exposed skin. Lily huddled against the damp brick wall, her threadbare hoodie offering little protection against the bone-deep cold. She had endured harsh nights before, but this one felt different, like the city itself had turned against her, determined to swallow her whole. Shivering, she tightened her grip on her most precious possession, a faded gray blanket, frayed at the edges, but thick enough to keep her from freezing. It wasn't much, but in a world that had given her nothing, it was all she had. Then she heard it, a soft whimper. Lily stiffened, her survival instincts kicking in. Out here, strange noises could mean trouble. She listened, her breath clouding in the icy air. Another whimper, this time weaker. It came from the alley's far end, near a row of overflowing dumpsters. Cautiously, she crept forward, her heart pounding. And then she saw it, a small dog, barely more than skin and bones, curled up in the shadows. Its fur was matted, its ribs pressing against its fragile skin. It shivered violently, its tiny body racked with the same cold that had been punishing her for hours. Lily exhaled slowly. She had seen stray animals before, but this one was different. Maybe it was the way it looked at her, eyes dull yet pleading, as if it had already accepted its fate. Maybe it was because, in that moment, she saw a reflection of herself, unwanted, forgotten, struggling to survive a world that had long since stopped caring. She crouched down, careful not to startle it. "Hey, little guy," she murmured. "Rough night, huh?" The dog didn't move, only shivered harder. Lily hesitated. The smart thing to do would be to walk away. She barely had enough to keep herself warm, let alone astray. If she gave up her blanket, she'd be defenseless against the cold. It was her only shield. But as she stared at the trembling creature, something inside her cracked. Without another thought, she unfolded her blanket and draped it gently over the dog's frail body. The tiny animal flinched at first, then stilled, its tremors easing slightly beneath the warmth. Lily sat down beside it, pulling part of the blanket over herself as well, her body pressing close to share what little heat she had left. "There," she whispered. "That's better, right?" The dog let out a soft sigh and nestled into the fabric. Lily leaned back against the brick wall, exhaustion settling into her bones. She knew she had just made her night even harder, but somehow she didn't regret it. For the first time in a long time, she felt something other than numbness. A cold gust blew through the alley, and Lily squeezed her arms around herself, willing sleep to come. What she didn't know was that someone had been. Just across the street, inside a sleek black car parked beneath a flickering street lamp, a man sat in silence. His suit was crisp, his coat expensive, but his expression was unreadable. He had just left a high-profile charity event, one filled with polite applause and empty speeches about helping the less fortunate. But none of them had done what this girl just did. As he watched her sacrifice the only thing keeping her warm for the sake of a helpless creature, something shifted inside him. He reached for his phone. "I need you to find someone for me," he said. "And I need it done tonight." Lily had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Lily stirred as the first hints of dawn crept over the city skyline. Her body ached from a cold, her fingers stiff and numb, but the soft rise and fall of the small creature beside her reminded her why she had spent the night without her blanket. The dog, no, her dog now, was still there, tucked beneath the worn fabric. For a moment, she feared it might not have survived the night. But then a tiny ear twitched. A faint sigh escaped its frail body as it shifted slightly, burrowing deeper into the warmth she had given it. Lily exhaled in relief. "Still with me? Huh?" she murmured, running a tentative hand over its thin fur. It flinched but didn't move away. Trust was slow to build. She understood that better than anyone. The streets were waking up around her now. The hum of early morning traffic, the distant shouts of vendors setting up their stalls, signs of a world that moved forward, oblivious to those left behind. Lily sat up, careful not to disturb the dog, and rubbed her arms for warmth. Without her blanket, the cold had sunk into her bones overnight, leaving her sluggish and aching. She pulled her hood tighter over her head, trying to shake off the stiffness. She'd have to find something to eat soon. And maybe, if she was lucky, a new blanket. She looked down at the dog, who blinked up at her with wary brown eyes. "I should find you some food too," she said. "Not that I know where. But we'll figure it out." The dog didn't respond, of course it didn't, but there was something in the way it looked at her, something that felt like understanding. She shifted, getting ready to stand, when a sound made her freeze. A slow, deliberate footstep. Lily's instincts kicked in instantly. She wasn't alone. Her muscles tensed as she glanced toward the alley entrance. A man stood there, silhouetted against the early morning light. Tall, well-dressed, out of place. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't another street kid. And he definitely was lost. Every nerve in Lily's body screamed for her to run. She had learned the hard way that when people like him approached people like her, it rarely ended well. But he didn't come closer. He simply held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady but calm. "I just want to talk." Lily's eyes narrowed. "Yeah? Well, I don't." The man exhaled, as if expecting her reaction. He pulled something from his pocket, a paper bag, and placed it carefully on the ground. The smell of fresh pastries and coffee drifted toward her, making her stomach clench with hunger. "Take it," he said. "Eat first. Then, if you want, I'll leave." Lily didn't move. It could be a trick. It had to be a trick. But the hunger gnawed at her insides, making it hard to think straight. And the dog, Hope, she decided, let out a soft whimper as if it, too, could smell the food. The man took a step back, giving her space. "You don't have to trust me," he said. "But I saw what you did last night. And I think you deserve more than this." Lily frowned. Saw what I did. He nodded. "You gave up your only warmth for a creature even more helpless than you. That's not something many people would do." His gaze softened. "It made me wonder what else the world has overlooked about you." A lump formed in Lily's throat, but she shoved it down. She didn't know what this man wanted, but she wasn't about to let herself hope for something good. Hope only ever led to disappointment. Still, her eyes flickered to the bag. The man didn't push. He simply waited. Lily exhaled sharply and reached for the food. If nothing else, she'd take what she could get. What she didn't know was that this was the beginning of something far bigger than a war meal. This was the moment fate stepped in. Lily devoured the croissant in record time, barely pausing to chew as the buttery flakes melted in her mouth. She hadn't tasted anything this good in. Well, she couldn't even remember the last time. The man watched her in silence, his hands tucked into the pockets of his long coat. He made no move to rush her, no attempt to speak. Just waited. That made her nervous. Most people didn't just wait. Most people either ignored her completely or demanded something in return. She was used to those types, the ones who thought a free meal meant she owed them something. She eyed him warily as she took a sip of the coffee. It was hot, slightly sweet, and almost too good to be real. "What's his angle?" "You're not a cop," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "No." "You're not with some church group?" He smiled faintly. "No." She narrowed her eyes. "Then why are you here?" The man exhaled, glancing down at the little dog still curled up under the blanket. "Because I saw something last night that most people would have walked past without a second thought. A girl with nothing gave up the only thing keeping her warm for a dog that wasn't even hers." His gaze lifted back to hers. "That's rare." Lily stiffened. "It was just a blanket. Not a big deal." "It was survival," he corrected. "And you risked it for someone else." She didn't like the way he was looking at her. Like she was good or something. Like she mattered. "Look," she said, shifting her weight, ready to grab Hope and run if she had to. "I don't know what you want, but I'm not some charity case. I'm fine on my own." His expression didn't change. "Are you?" Lily bristled. Yeah, been fine for years." The man studied her, like he was weighing his next words carefully. "What if you didn't have to be?" Her stomach tightened. "What?" He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, but kept enough distance that she didn't feel trapped. "I don't believe in accidents," he said. "Last night, I left a fundraiser for homelessness. listening to wealthy people make empty promises about helping kids like you. Then, minutes later, I saw you, actually helping someone with the little you had. That's not coincidence. Lily scoffed. So what? You're like my guardian angel or something? He chuckled. No, just someone who wants to help in a real way. She crossed her arms. And why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he said simply. Not yet. But if you give me a chance, I can prove I mean what I say. Lily bit her lip. Everything in her screamed, don't fall for it. People didn't just show up out of nowhere and offer help with no strings attached. That wasn't how the world worked. But then she looked down at Hope, still weak, still too fragile to survive another brutal night on the streets. She wasn't just deciding for herself anymore. Lily met the man's gaze. What exactly are you offering? His lips quirked up slightly. A second chance. And just like that, the world she thought she knew began to shift. Lily stared at the man, trying to gauge whether he was serious or just another smooth talker with an agenda. A second chance? What did that even mean for someone like her? She had spent years learning not to trust words like that. Too many people had promised her help before. Social workers who said they'd figure something out before the system chewed her up and spat her out. Teachers who claimed they'd be there before looking the other way. Strangers who gave her a couple of dollars and told her to stay safe before disappearing back into their warm homes. People meant well right up until they didn't. So why was this guy any different? Lily pulled the blanket tighter around Hope. A second chance at what? She asked, her voice edged with skepticism. The man didn't flinch at her tone. At something better than this, he said, nodding at the alley around them. Food, shelter, a chance to get back on your feet. No strings attached. Lily let out a short laugh, sharp and humorless. Yeah, right. There's always strings. He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. I get why you'd think that. But I'm not here to make you do anything you don't want to. I just want to help. Lily shifted uncomfortably. If this was some kind of scam, she couldn't figure out the angle. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't trying to drag her somewhere against her will. He was just offering, and that made her nervous. Why me? She asked. The man studied her for a moment. Because you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. There was something in his voice, a heaviness, a shadow of something personal. But Lily didn't press. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Instead, she let her mind turn over the possibilities. If he was telling the truth, this could be her way out. A real one. No more sleeping in alleys, no more stealing food just to survive, no more bracing for the next time someone tried to hurt her because they thought she was too weak to fight back. But what if it was a lie? What if he was just another person who'd promise her the world and then disappear when things got complicated? She glanced down at Hope, still curled up beside her. The little dog had stopped trembling, the blanket's warmth finally sinking in. But if they spent another night out here, that might not be enough. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet the man's gaze. Say, I believe you. Where exactly would I be going? He smiled slightly, as if he knew this was her way of saying maybe. I have an extra room in my house, he said. Safe, warm. A place for you and your dog to stay while you figure things out. No obligations. If you decide it's not for you, you're free to leave whenever you want. Lily's heart pounded. It sounded too good to be true. But then, again, maybe she wanted to believe. She looked down at Hope, then back at the man. One chance, that's all she'd give him. One chance to prove he wasn't like the rest. She squared her shoulders. All right, she said. I'll come with you. And with those 5 words, her life changed forever. The car was too warm, too clean. Lily sat stiffly in the leather passenger seat, her fingers clutching Hope, who lay curled in her lap. The dog's breathing had evened out, his tiny body finally relaxed in the comfort of the heated car. But Lily couldn't bring herself to relax. She was out of place here, an unwanted stain on something too perfect. The scent of expensive leather filled her nose, so different from the grimy streets and damp alleyways she was used to. She had spent years surviving in the cold, and now, wrapped in the heat of this stranger's generosity, she felt like she was suffocating. The man, Daniel Carter, he had finally told her, drove in silence, giving her space. No prying questions, no forced conversation. It should have made her feel more at ease, but it only made her more suspicious. "So what's your deal?" she asked, staring out the window. The city blurred past, endless rows of shops and restaurants filled with people who had never once looked at her. Daniel glanced at her. "My deal? Yeah. Nobody does what you're doing for nothing. You some kind of rich guy trying to make himself feel better." He didn't look offended. In fact, he almost smiled. "I guess you could say I've been lucky in life. But I also know what it's like to need help and not get it." Lily shot him a skeptical look. "Yeah? You ever sleep under a bridge?" His fingers tightened briefly around the steering wheel. "No. But I've known people who have." Lily frowned. She wasn't sure if that made him more or less trustworthy. They drove in silence for another few minutes before the car pulled onto a long driveway leading up to a house that was, well, ridiculous. She stared as the sleek, modern home came into view. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a porch big enough to fit an entire family, and a front yard so perfectly manicured it looked like something out of a magazine. Lily swallowed hard. "I can't go in there," she blurted. Daniel put the car in park and turned to her. "Why not?" She looked down at herself, at her torn jeans, at the grime under her fingernails, at the way Hope's fur was still matted from weeks of living on the streets. "I don't belong here." Daniel's expression softened. "That's not true." Lily's chest tightened. "People like me don't get houses like this. We get shelters that kick us out at dawn. We get cops telling us to move along. We don't get—" She gestured toward the house, her throat tightening. Asterisk this, asterisk. Daniel was quiet for a long moment before he said, "Maybe it's time that changed." Lily clenched her jaw. She wanted to argue, to tell him she knew how the world worked, and that no amount of kind words would make her suddenly fit into a life she'd never had. But then she felt Hope shift in her lap, his tiny body pressing into hers. He needed this. Maybe deep down she did too. She took a deep breath. "One night," she said finally, "just to warm up. Then I'll figure something else out." Daniel nodded, as if he understood. "One night," he agreed. But as she stepped into the house, feeling warmth wrap around her in a way she hadn't felt in years, Lily had no idea that one night was about to turn into something much more. Lily hesitated in the doorway, her heart pounding as she took in the sheer size of the house. It was massive, too clean, too perfect. The floors gleamed under soft lighting, and the air smelled of something warm and inviting, like cinnamon and fresh laundry. She felt like an intruder. Hope squirmed in her arms, sniffing the air cautiously, his tiny body still weak, but already more alert than before. If only she could feel that kind of security. Instead, unease slithered through her like a warning. Daniel stepped past her, unbothered by her hesitation. "You can take off your shoes if you want," he said casually, shrugging off his coat and hanging it by the door. "Or not. Whatever makes you comfortable." Lily scoffed. "Yeah, comfortable isn't really in my vocabulary." Daniel didn't react, just gave her a small nod as if he understood. "Come on, let me show you where you'll be staying." She forced her legs to move, following him through the house. Every step made her more anxious. There were too many expensive-looking things, too many soft rugs she didn't want to stain with her filthy boots. He led her down a hallway and stopped in front of a door. "Here," he said, pushing it open. Lily stepped inside and froze. The room was beautiful. Not huge, but warm. A bed with soft-looking blankets, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp already turned on. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, and a window overlooked a small garden. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. That terrified her. She turned to Daniel, crossing her arms. "Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because I can." Lily narrowed her eyes. "That's not an answer." Daniel sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone I couldn't help back then. Maybe this is my chance to make things right." Lily frowned. "Who?" A shadow passed over his face, but he didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the bed. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." Lily wanted to push, to demand the truth, but exhaustion tugged at her, and Hope let out a small yawn in her arms. "Fine," she muttered. One night, Daniel gave her a knowing look but said nothing. As the door clicked shut behind him, Lily let out a slow breath. She placed Hope gently on the bed and sat beside him, running a hand over his tiny frame. "This is crazy, right?" she whispered. Hope didn't answer, just snuggled closer, already trusting this new warmth. Lily lay back, staring at the ceiling. She had spent years believing that no one cared, that the world had nothing for her but cold streets and empty promises. But now, for the first time in forever, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore, and that scared her more than anything.